Defense attorney Marcus Wellington was seconds away from humiliating another young prosecutor when everything went wrong. The beautiful blonde across from him had just pulled out an FBI badge and announced that the entire courtroom was under federal investigation. What Wellington didn't know was that the inexperienced prosecutor he'd been mocking for 2 hours was actually Special Agent Detective Rachel Martinez, and she'd been recording every illegal thing he'd done for the past 18 months. Welcome to Silent Hero Stories. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where in the world are you watching from today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button. Now, let me tell you how we got to this moment. 24 months earlier, FBI Director Sarah Chen had called an emergency meeting at the federal building in Los Angeles. The subject, the most sophisticated legal corruption network the Bureau had ever encountered. At the center of it all was defense attorney Marcus Wellington, a man who hadn't just bent the law, he'd bought it, sold it, and turned the entire Los Angeles legal system into his personal money-making operation. Wellington has been operating with impunity for over a decade, Director Chen told the assembled agents. He's bribed judges, intimidated witnesses, bought verdicts, and turned criminal defense into organized crime. Traditional investigation methods have failed because he's corrupted the very system we depend on for evidence. The case files spread across the conference table told a story of systematic corruption that reached into every level of the legal system. Wellington didn't just represent criminals, he coordinated their activities, planned their defenses before crimes were committed, and ensured that evidence disappeared before it could reach courtrooms. We need someone who can get inside his operation, Chen continued. Someone he would never suspect. Someone who can gather evidence while actually working within the system he's corrupted. That's when Special Agent Detective Rachel Martinez volunteered for the most dangerous undercover assignment of her career. Rachel Martinez had joined the FBI 7 years earlier after graduating summa cum laude from Harvard Law School. Her combination of legal expertise and federal training made her uniquely qualified for undercover work in legal settings. But what made her perfect for the Wellington investigation was something much simpler. She looked exactly like the kind of young, attractive prosecutor that Wellington loved to destroy. The transformation took 6 months of preparation. Rachel had to become not just a prosecutor, but a prosecutor believable enough to handle real cases while gathering evidence against Wellington. She studied under former prosecutors, learned the nervous mannerisms of inexperienced attorneys, and perfected the appearance of someone who was beautiful but lacked the confidence to use that beauty as a weapon. Most importantly, she had to convince everyone, including seasoned judges and experienced attorneys, that she was exactly what she appeared to be, a young woman who had gotten her position through affirmative action rather than merit, someone who could be intimidated, dismissed, and ultimately destroyed by someone as ruthless as Marcus Wellington. The morning that would end Wellington's career started 18 months into Rachel's deep cover assignment. She had already prosecuted 17 cases while gathering evidence against Wellington, building relationships with court personnel, and slowly documenting the systematic corruption that had turned Los Angeles criminal courts into Wellington's personal empire. The Superior Court of Los Angeles buzzed with its usual morning activity. Lawyers hurried between courtrooms carrying briefcases full of legal strategies, defendants met with attorneys who promised miracles they couldn't deliver, and the constant machinery of justice ground forward one case at a time. Rachel Martinez sat at the prosecution table in Courtroom 7, reviewing her notes for what appeared to be a routine assault case. Her platinum blonde hair was styled in the conservative bun she had perfected for her prosecutor persona, her blue eyes focused on documents that everyone assumed contained standard legal preparations. What they actually contained were FBI surveillance reports, wiretap transcripts, financial records showing illegal payments, and a minute-by-minute plan to finally trap the most corrupt defense attorney in California. Well, came the familiar voice that had haunted Rachel's undercover assignment for 18 months. Marcus Wellington approached her table with the predatory confidence of someone who had built his career on the destruction of younger attorneys. At 52, Wellington was everything the FBI had trained Rachel to despise: arrogant, corrupt, and absolutely convinced that his money and connections made him untouchable. Wellington's reputation preceded him into every courtroom. He was known for his expensive suits, his collection of luxury cars, and his particular enjoyment of humiliating attractive female prosecutors. What the legal community didn't know was that his wealth came not from legal fees, but from a sophisticated criminal enterprise that had corrupted dozens of cases and generated millions in illegal revenue. "Good morning, Mr. Wellington," Rachel replied with the nervous smile she had practiced in mirrors for months. To everyone watching, she looked like a prosecutor intimidated by Wellington's reputation and struggling to maintain her composure in the face of his obvious contempt. In reality, She was a federal agent about to spring the most sophisticated legal trap in FBI history. I have to say, Martinez, Wellington continued, using her last name with the casual disrespect he reserved for prosecutors he considered beneath his notice, I'm surprised they're still letting you handle felony cases. After your performance in the Richardson trial, I would have thought they'd move you back to traffic violations. The Richardson trial had been 3 months earlier, a case where Rachel had deliberately allowed Wellington to humiliate her in court while FBI surveillance equipment recorded every illegal tactic he used. She had appeared incompetent while actually gathering federal evidence that would eventually destroy his career. I'm always looking to improve, Mr. Wellington, Rachel said, maintaining the self-deprecating tone that had convinced everyone she lacked confidence in her abilities. I'm sure you are, sweetheart, Wellington replied, using the patronizing endearment that made Rachel's jaw clench with suppressed anger. But improvement requires natural ability, and some people just aren't cut out for criminal law. Maybe you should consider family law. I hear they're always looking for attorneys who can relate to domestic situations. It was a calculated insult designed to suggest that Rachel's only value was her appearance and her presumed desire for marriage and children. The old Rachel Martinez, before FBI training, might have been devastated. But Special Agent Detective Martinez had been preparing for this conversation for 18 months. The case they were trying seemed straightforward enough on the surface. Wellington's client, Anthony Castellano, was accused of aggravated assault against a witness in a previous trial. But the reality was far more complex. The witness was actually Special Agent Michael Torres, an undercover FBI operative who had been posing as a construction worker for 2 years while investigating Wellington's connections to organized crime. The assault had been carefully orchestrated by the FBI to create the legal justification needed to bring Wellington into a courtroom where every word would be recorded by federal surveillance equipment. Castellano didn't know his victim was a federal agent, but Wellington had specifically instructed him to intimidate the witness, an instruction that constituted federal conspiracy charges. Judge Patricia Harrison took the bench with the authority of someone who had been presiding over criminal cases for over 25 years. She was known throughout the legal community for running an efficient courtroom, having little patience for attorney theatrics, and maintaining absolute control over her proceedings. What she didn't know was that today's trial would test every aspect of her judicial experience. Good morning, counselors, Judge Harrison said, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. Are we ready to proceed with jury selection in People v. Castellano? The prosecution is ready, Your Honor, Rachel said, standing with the nervous energy that everyone had come to expect from the young prosecutor who seemed perpetually overwhelmed by the complexity of criminal law. The defense is more than ready, Your Honor, Wellington added with a smirk that suggested he was looking forward to what would undoubtedly be another easy victory over an incompetent prosecutor. What Wellington couldn't know was that Rachel had spent 18 months studying his tactics with the intensity of a federal agent preparing for the most important case of her career. She knew exactly how he operated. He would spend the entire trial undermining her credibility, making subtle references to her appearance and age, questioning her competence in front of the jury, and generally treating her like an attractive decoration who had wandered into his courtroom by mistake. More importantly, Rachel knew that Wellington's tactics weren't just personally offensive, they were part of a calculated strategy to ensure that juries focused on the prosecutor's apparent weaknesses rather than the evidence against his clients. It was a form of legal misdirection that had helped him win cases for clients who should have been convicted. The jury selection process began exactly as Rachel had predicted based on 18 months of observation. Wellington used his peremptory challenges to eliminate anyone who might be sympathetic to a young prosecutor, while making comments designed to undermine her authority in front of the entire jury pool. Your Honor, Wellington said during one challenge, I'm concerned that this potential juror might be biased in favor of the prosecution due to, well, let's just say some people might be more interested in the prosecutor's appearance than her legal arguments. It was a calculated insult designed to make Rachel look weak and unprofessional while simultaneously suggesting to the jury that she was using her looks rather than legal skill to try the case. The comment was subtle enough to avoid direct sanctions from the judge, but obvious enough to achieve its intended effect. Your Honor, Rachel replied with the controlled professionalism she had learned through years of federal training disguised as nervous determination. I trust that the members of our jury pool are capable of focusing on the evidence and the law rather than whatever personal observations Mr. Wellington might be making about the attorneys involved. It was a perfect response, professional enough to maintain her cover as an inexperienced prosecutor, but containing just enough steel to suggest that she wouldn't be completely intimidated by Wellington's tactics. Wellington's eyes narrowed slightly as he realized that this prosecutor might be more challenging than he had initially anticipated. During a break in jury selection, Wellington approached Rachel's table with the casual arrogance that had made him infamous among younger attorneys. "You know, Martinez, that was a nice little speech about focusing on evidence. Very idealistic. Very naive. But this isn't law school, and juries don't make decisions based on evidence alone." "What do you mean?" Rachel asked, playing the role of the confused young prosecutor who didn't understand the more sophisticated aspects of trial strategy. "I mean," Wellington said, lowering his voice to the conspiratorial tone he used when sharing what he considered wisdom with inferior attorneys, "juries make decisions based on who they trust, who they like, and who they believe deserves to win. And right now, they're looking at a seasoned attorney with 25 years of experience facing off against a pretty girl who looks like she should be teaching elementary school." "I see," Rachel said, though what she actually saw was Wellington admitting to exactly the kind of manipulative tactics that the FBI had been documenting for months. "Don't take it personally," Wellington continued with false sympathy. "It's not your fault that you don't have the experience for this level of criminal law. But maybe after I finish with you today, you'll consider moving to a practice area more suited to your particular strengths." Rachel nodded as if accepting his condescending advice, but internally she was cataloging every word for the federal report that would accompany Wellington's arrest warrant. The opening statements began with Wellington delivering his usual performance, passionate, convincing, and designed to make the prosecution look foolish while subtly undermining the prosecutor's credibility. He painted his client as a victim of overzealous law enforcement and suggested that the prosecutor was in over her head with a case she didn't have the experience to understand. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Wellington said in his perfectly modulated courtroom voice, "you're going to see a lot of enthusiasm from the prosecution today. Youthful enthusiasm. Energy. Determination. All admirable qualities. But enthusiasm isn't evidence, and looking professional in a courtroom isn't the same as having the experience necessary to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt." He gestured toward Rachel with the kind of patronizing gesture that suggested she was a child playing dress-up in adult clothes. "The prosecutor is going to tell you that my client committed a serious assault. She's going to present witnesses, evidence, and arguments designed to convince you that a hard-working man should go to prison based on the testimony of someone with a clear motive to lie." Wellington's opening was masterful in its manipulation. He managed to question Rachel's competence without directly insulting her, suggest that the case was too complex for her to handle properly, and frame the entire prosecution as the mistake of an inexperienced attorney who didn't understand the nuances of criminal law. Rachel stood for her opening statement with the composed grace she had developed through years of federal training carefully disguised as nervous professionalism. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Mr. Wellington is absolutely right about one thing: this case is about evidence. And the evidence will show that his client, Anthony Castellano, committed a violent assault against witness Michael Torres in broad daylight in front of multiple witnesses. What she didn't say, what she couldn't say yet, was that every detail of that assault had been planned and executed as part of a federal sting operation designed to gather evidence against Wellington himself. Michael Torres wasn't just a witness, he was a federal agent who had been specifically targeted for intimidation because of his testimony in a previous case. The evidence will show," Rachel continued, "that Mr. Castellano approached Mr. Torres outside the courthouse following Torres's testimony in an unrelated trial. The evidence will show that Castellano threatened Torres, demanded that he recant his previous testimony, and when Torres refused, Castellano assaulted him with sufficient force to require medical treatment." Rachel's opening was deliberately straightforward, designed to sound like the work of a prosecutor who understood the basics of her case but lacked the sophistication to recognize its larger implications. In reality, every word had been carefully chosen to elicit specific responses from Wellington and his client. The prosecution's case proceeded exactly as Rachel had choreographed it over months of federal planning. Witness after witness testified about the assault, each one providing testimony that seemed routine but was actually designed to elicit specific responses from Wellington that would provide evidence of his broader criminal conspiracy. Michael Torres took the stand as the prosecution's star witness, playing his role as a construction worker who had been intimidated for telling the truth in court. His testimony was compelling, detailed, and completely believable, partly because it was largely true, and partly because he was a trained federal agent with years of experience in undercover operations. "Mr. Torres," Rachel said during direct examination, "can you tell the jury what happened on the afternoon of March 15th? "I was leaving the courthouse after testifying in another case," Torres said, his voice carrying the slightly nervous tone of a civilian who wasn't comfortable in legal proceedings. "I was walking to my truck when this guy approached me." "Can you identify the person who approached you?" Torres pointed to Castellano. "That's him. The defendant." What did Mr. Castellano say to you? He said I needed to think real carefully about the testimony I'd given. Said there were people who weren't happy about what I'd said in court. Wellington's cross-examination of Torres was where 18 months of FBI preparation began to pay off. Wellington had no idea that every question he asked was being answered by a federal agent trained specifically for this moment. Mr. Torres, Wellington began, you testified that my client threatened you. But isn't it true that you have a history of making false accusations against people you don't like? No, that's not true. Isn't it true that you've been in trouble with the law yourself? I've never been convicted of anything. Wellington's questions were designed to discredit Torres, but they also revealed Wellington's access to information that should have been confidential. How did Wellington know about Torres's supposed legal troubles? The answer was that Wellington had connections throughout the law enforcement and legal system that provided him with information he used to intimidate witnesses. Mr. Torres, Wellington continued, isn't it true that you were paid to testify in the previous case? I was never paid anything. But you received consideration for your testimony, didn't you? I don't know what you mean. Wellington's line of questioning was revealing exactly what the FBI had suspected. He had access to confidential information about witnesses and used that information to intimidate them. Every question he asked was providing evidence for federal conspiracy charges. During a break in testimony, Wellington approached Rachel with the confidence of someone who believed he was dominating the trial. You're doing better than I expected, Martinez. But you're still not asking the right questions. What do you mean? Rachel asked, maintaining her facade of inexperience. Your witness is hiding something, Wellington said with the knowing smile of someone who had access to information the prosecution didn't. Torres isn't the innocent construction worker he's pretending to be. If you were more experienced, you'd know how to dig deeper. What should I be asking? Wellington's eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of someone sharing insider knowledge. Ask him about his connections to certain business associates. Ask him about money that might have changed hands. Ask him about why he really testified in that previous case. Rachel nodded as if grateful for the advice, but what Wellington had just done was provide evidence that he had investigated Torres using resources that were almost certainly illegal. A legitimate defense attorney might suspect that a witness was hiding something, but Wellington spoke with the certainty of someone who had definitive information about Torres's background. I appreciate the advice, Mr. Wellington, Rachel said. You obviously have resources for investigating witnesses that I don't have access to. Experience, Martinez. 25 years of experience teaches you how to find information that younger attorneys miss. But Rachel knew that Wellington's experience actually consisted of a network of corrupt investigators, bribed court personnel, and illegal surveillance that provided him with information no ethical attorney should possess. The prosecution's case continued with testimony from additional witnesses who had observed the assault. Each witness provided consistent testimony about what they had seen, but Wellington's cross-examination revealed his access to personal information about each witness that suggested extensive illegal investigation. During the examination of Sarah Chen, a witness who had been walking past the courthouse when the assault occurred, Wellington asked questions that revealed he knew about her employment history, her financial situation, and her personal relationships. Ms. Chen, Wellington said, isn't it true that you're currently experiencing financial difficulties? I don't see how that's relevant. Isn't it true that you recently applied for a loan that was denied? Rachel objected to the relevance of the question, but the damage was done. Wellington had demonstrated that he had investigated Chen's personal finances, information that required either illegal access to confidential records or the services of investigators who operated outside legal boundaries. After Chen's testimony, Rachel approached Wellington during a break. How did you know about her loan application? Wellington smiled with the satisfaction of someone who enjoyed demonstrating his superiority. Due diligence, Martinez. You have to investigate your witnesses thoroughly if you want to discredit them effectively. But loan applications are confidential. How do you get access to that kind of information? Connections, Wellington said, his voice carrying the hint of someone who enjoyed having secrets. When you've been practicing as long as I have, you develop relationships with people who can provide useful information. What kind of people? Wellington's smile became more calculating. People who understand that information is valuable, and that value can be compensated. Rachel nodded as if impressed by Wellington's sophistication, but what he had just described was a criminal conspiracy involving bribery, illegal surveillance, and corruption of confidential records. Every word of their conversation was being recorded by FBI surveillance equipment hidden in her briefcase. The turning point in the trial came when Wellington called his own witness, a character witness for Castellano who, unknown to Wellington, was actually an FBI informant who had been recording their conversations for months. Vincent Torino took the stand as a character witness, but his real purpose was to provide Wellington with an opportunity to demonstrate his connections to organized crime figures. Torino was a low-level associate in the Marconi crime family who had been cooperating with federal investigators for over a year. "Mr. Torino," Wellington said during direct examination, "how long have you known the defendant?" "About 5 years. We grew up in the same neighborhood." "In your opinion, is Anthony Castellano the type of person who would commit an unprovoked assault?" "Absolutely not," Torino replied, delivering testimony that sounded convincing but was actually scripted by federal agents. "Tony's not violent. He's just been targeted because of who his friends are." Wellington had no idea that his character witness was wearing a recording device and had been instructed to elicit specific responses from the defense attorney. Rachel's cross-examination of Torino was where 18 months of preparation finally reached its climax. "Mr. Torino, when you say Mr. Castellano has been targeted, what exactly do you mean?" "Well, you know, the cops have it out for him because of his associations." "His associations with whom?" Wellington should have objected, but he was too confident in his witness to recognize the trap being set. "People in his neighborhood. Business associates. Family friends." "Business associates like Vincent Marconi?" The name hit the courtroom like a thunderbolt. Vincent Marconi was the head of the most powerful organized crime family in Los Angeles, and mentioning his name in open court was a calculated risk that Rachel had gotten specific authorization from FBI headquarters to take. Wellington was on his feet immediately, his face pale with shock. "Objection. Relevance?" "Your Honor," Rachel said with newfound confidence that surprised everyone in the courtroom, "if the defense is going to claim that Mr. Castellano has been unfairly targeted due to his associations, I believe the prosecution has the right to explore the exact nature of those associations." Judge Harrison considered for a moment, clearly recognizing that the trial had taken an unexpected turn. "I'll allow it, but tread carefully, counselor." "Mr. Torino," Rachel continued, "are you personally acquainted with Vincent Marconi?" "I know of him." "Do you work for any businesses associated with Mr. Marconi?" "I invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Defense witness invoking Fifth Amendment protections was extraordinary enough to suggest that something significant was happening. "Mr. Torino, have you ever been present during conversations between Mr. Castellano and representatives of Mr. Marconi's organization?" Fifth Amendment. "Have you ever received money from Mr. Wellington in exchange for testimony in this or any other case?" Wellington shot to his feet. "Objection. This is outrageous." But before Judge Harrison could rule, Torino answered, "Fifth Amendment." Rachel turned to Wellington with an expression that was no longer nervous or intimidated. For the first time in 18 months, he saw her as she really was, confident, intelligent, and absolutely in control of the situation. "Your Honor," Rachel said, "I think this might be an appropriate time for a brief recess to discuss some matters with the court." "Agreed," Judge Harrison said, clearly recognizing that the trial had moved far beyond a simple assault case. "We'll reconvene in 30 minutes. During the recess, Wellington confronted Torino in the hallway outside the courtroom, unaware that FBI agents positioned throughout the building were recording every word. "What the hell is going on, Torino?" Wellington demanded. "You said you could handle her questions. I am handling them. But that prosecutor knows things she shouldn't know." "What kind of things?" "Things about Marconi. Things about our business arrangements. Things about money changing hands." Wellington's blood went cold. "What money?" "The money you gave me to testify. The money Marconi gives you to fix cases." "All of it." "You never told me you were connected to Marconi. You never asked. You just wanted someone who could make Castellano look good." For the first time in his career, Marcus Wellington realized he might be in serious trouble. But he had no idea how serious. When court reconvened, Rachel stood to address the judge with an authority that shocked everyone who had been watching her struggle through 18 months of apparently unsuccessful prosecutions. "Your Honor," she said, "in light of the testimony we've heard today, I believe the court needs to be made aware of some additional information relevant to this case." She reached into her briefcase and withdrew a leather folder that she approached the bench to hand to Judge Harrison. "Your Honor, I'm submitting what I'm marking as Prosecution Exhibit A." Judge Harrison opened the folder and her expression changed completely. Inside was federal identification for Special Agent Detective Rachel Martinez, Federal Bureau of Investigation, along with federal court orders authorizing an undercover investigation into corruption in the Los Angeles legal system. "Your Honor," Agent Martinez said, no longer playing the role of nervous prosecutor. This case was initiated as part of an 18-month federal investigation into systematic corruption involving defense attorney Marcus Wellington, his connections to organized crime figures, and his pattern of bribing witnesses, intimidating prosecutors, and corrupting legal proceedings. The courtroom was in absolute chaos. Wellington was standing at his table, his face white with shock and fear. "This is impossible. You can't do this. This is entrapment." "Your Honor," Agent Martinez continued, "Mr. Castellano's assault on Agent Michael Torres was committed at Mr. Wellington's specific direction as part of a pattern of witness intimidation that constitutes federal racketeering violations." Judge Harrison was reading through the federal authorization documents with obvious amazement. "Agent Martinez, how long has this investigation been active?" 18 months, Your Honor. Mr. Wellington has been under continuous federal surveillance for corruption, witness tampering, bribery, and conspiracy with organized crime figures. Today's trial was designed to gather the final evidence needed for federal prosecution. And Mr. Torres? Is Special Agent Michael Torres of the FBI, Your Honor. He was placed undercover specifically to gather evidence of Mr. Wellington's witness intimidation tactics. "This is a setup," Wellington shouted, his composure completely shattered. "I demand to speak to my attorney." "Mr. Wellington," Agent Martinez said with the calm authority of a federal agent who had just completed a successful operation, "you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you exercise that right." Federal agents emerged from positions throughout the courtroom, agents who had been posing as court personnel, spectators, bailiffs, and even members of the jury pool for the past 18 months. Wellington was surrounded before he could even consider attempting to leave. "Marcus Wellington," Agent Martinez announced, "you are under arrest for conspiracy under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, witness tampering, obstruction of justice, bribery of public officials, and violation of federal civil rights statutes." As Wellington was handcuffed, Agent Martinez turned to address the stunned courtroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the extended deception, but this investigation required comprehensive undercover work to document systematic corruption that had compromised multiple levels of our legal system." Judge Harrison was still reading through the federal documents, her expression showing the full scope of what she was learning. "Agent Martinez, what was the scope of this investigation?" "Extensive, Your Honor. Mr. Wellington's criminal enterprise involved bribery of court personnel, illegal surveillance of witnesses, corruption of evidence, and coordination with organized crime figures to fix cases and intimidate law enforcement. We have documented over 40 cases where Mr. Wellington used illegal methods to secure acquittals for guilty defendants. And today's case was specifically designed to demonstrate Mr. Wellington's methods while gathering admissible evidence of his criminal activities. Mr. Castellano will be facing federal charges along with Mr. Wellington, as will several other individuals who participated in this conspiracy." The beautiful blonde prosecutor they had all assumed was struggling with her first major case had just revealed herself as a federal agent who had conducted the most sophisticated undercover investigation in the history of the Los Angeles legal system. Marcus Wellington's career in legal corruption had come to an end at the hands of someone he had never bothered to take seriously. As Wellington was led away in handcuffs, he turned back to stare at Agent Martinez with a mixture of fear, anger, and grudging respect. "How long?" he asked. "How long have you been watching me?" Agent Martinez looked at the man who had spent 18 months humiliating her, insulting her appearance, questioning her competence, and treating her like an incompetent decoration. "Every day, Mr. Wellington. Every single day." The federal investigation would eventually lead to the conviction of Wellington, 3 judges, 12 court personnel, and 15 members of organized crime families. The Los Angeles legal system would undergo comprehensive reform, new oversight procedures would be implemented, and mandatory ethics training would be required for all court personnel. But for Agent Martinez, the most satisfying moment was watching Wellington realize that the beautiful young prosecutor he had dismissed as incompetent had been systematically destroying his criminal empire one recorded conversation at a time. What they didn't know about Special Agent Detective Rachel Martinez could have filled multiple classified files. But what everyone learned that day was that the most dangerous people in any room are often the ones everyone chooses to underestimate. The nervous young prosecutor they had all pitied had been hunting the most corrupt attorney in California, and she had been patient enough to spend 18 months gathering the evidence needed to ensure that justice was finally served. The beautiful blonde attorney they had dismissed as inexperienced had reminded everyone that sometimes the best way to catch a predator is to make them believe they're hunting prey, when in reality, they're walking into a trap set by someone who has been watching their every move, recording their every crime, and waiting for the perfect moment to spring the most sophisticated legal trap in FBI history.